Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Dear student teachers, I am Rashid Salim with lecture number 11. Lecture number 11 of Functional English 1. Lecture number 11 is about sharing personal narratives. If you can recall, in the previous lecture, lecture number 10, we learned a little bit about narrative texts. Lecture number 11 is actually a continuation of what we learned in the previous lecture. So it is advisable that we start with the review of the previous lecture. In lecture number 10, we learned how to recognize a narrative text. So we learned the difference between a narrative, an argumentative, or a descriptive text. And we talked that a narrative text narrates an event over a period of time. And we also talked about its structure. We analyzed the structure of narrative texts. And we learned that a narrative has a plot in it, it has a setting, it has characters, it has point of view. In lecture 10, we learned how to recognize a narrative text. So we learned how to differentiate between an argumentative or expository and narrative text. And we learned that a narrative text has a beginning, a middle, and an end. A narrative text actually narrates an event over a period of time. And we also learned that narrative texts could be fictional or non-fictional. And we looked at some types of narrative texts, for example, short stories, novels, comics, memoirs, autobiographies, etc. We also learned how to analyze the structure of narrative texts. And we looked at various elements that constitute a narrative text. For example, if you can recall, we looked at central elements or essential elements of a narrative text. For example, setting, characters, plot, point of view, and theme. And we talked a little bit in detail about the plot. And we learned that a plot begins with exposition statement or an orientation. Then there is rising action. Then there is conflict. Then the conflict leads to a climax. And then we have falling action. And finally, we have resolution. So the story actually passes through various phases. We also learned how to comprehend the contents of the narrative texts. And actually, you listened to a short story, you listened to a fable, I believe, and you also read a story, and then we discussed some questions related to it. Then, among those questions, there was a question of sharing personal response to the narrative text. So this is what we learned in lecture number 10. Now we move on to lecture number 11, which is a continuation of lecture number 10. After completing lecture 11, you should be able to understand what personal narrative is. You will be able to analyze some personal narratives. And finally, you will be able to write your own personal narrative. So as you can see, basically, lecture number 11 is about sharing personal narratives. And if you can recall, in the previous lecture, when we were looking at kinds of narratives, among non-fictional narrative texts, we also included personal narrative. And personal narrative, as its name suggests, it is non-fictional narrative text related to a person. So usually it is your own real life story. So if you are good at telling stories about your own lives, then feel excited because lecture number 11 is just about it. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about personal narrative genre first. The word genre is a French word and it should be pronounced as genre. Genre. Genre means types or kind, especially kind of literature. For example, poetry is a genre. Drama is a genre. So different genres of English literature include poetry, prose, drama, etc. So let's look at the three words first. Personal. So in this narrative we are going to relate a story that happened to us, an event that happened to us, or that was a real life event. Narrative is that we are going to narrate or we are going to tell that event, and genre is a kind of writing. So we are going to look at a kind of writing in which we will be able to narrate or tell the real life story from our own lives. Personal narratives are a form of writing in which the writer relates one event, incident, or experience from his or her life. So before you write a personal narrative, you should actually think of an event, incident, or experience from your own life that you think is worth sharing. Of course, there are plenty of things that happen to us, and some of these are worth sharing. Basically, human beings are interested in stories. They want to hear stories. They want to know about others. They want to share what happened to them. So personal narrative is important because it fulfills one of our basic desires, one of our basic needs, to communicate what happened to us or to listen to what happened to the others. Personal narratives allow you, that is, the writer, to share your life with others, vicariously experiencing the things you describe. Vicariously means that something that happened to you, you will explain it in a way that others would feel in a similar way. So you are not merely going to describe your experience, you are not merely going to tell what happened to you, you are going to tell it in a way that will make your readers feel or experience just exactly as you felt or experienced it. Of course, this is not an easy task. For that you need to be really imaginative, you need to be really creative. And although it is non-fiction, but still if you have literary talent, if you have creativity, it will be easier for you to use language in such a way that when you describe an event from your life, other people feel as if it happened to them, and they share your pleasures and pains with you. Your job as a writer is to put the threads in the midst of the action, letting them live through an event, incident, or experience. So merely telling what happened to you will be just like a news story, and we are not going to write a news story for the newspaper. Instead, we are going to write a personal narrative. So you will add threads. That means you will add sentences, you will add phrases, you would add certain devices, literary devices, I'll talk about them later, that would make your narrative more effective, that would make your narrative more interesting and also more realistic. Personal narratives also incorporate vivid descriptive details, as well as the thoughts, feelings, and reactions of the writer. Now, this sentence is really important. Look at the word vivid description. So while you write your personal narratives, you should include vivid or clear description, graphic detail, clear details of or description. So what can you describe? If you can recall, in the previous lecture we learned you can describe a character, you can describe a place, and you can describe an event. Good writers, they usually set up the scene by describing a place vividly, by describing a place clearly. And then they describe their characters, how old these characters are, what personality traits they have, what is their physical appearance, etc., etc. And you don't simply describe how they physically appear and how you yourself physically appear. Instead, apart from giving the details of the actions, you should also tell how you thought, how you felt, and how you reacted to what was happening to you. For writing a personal narrative piece of writing, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to choose one event from your life, one experience from your life that is worth sharing. And then you need to give graphic description of that event along with how you felt it, or what you thought about it, or how you reacted when something happened to you. And you need to tell it in a way that your readers feel exactly in the same way as you felt it yourself. Okay, a good personal narrative, like a good story, creates a dramatic effect. So it shouldn't be bland, it shouldn't be tasteless. Instead, it should add some drama to it. And what does that mean? It means that it should make us laugh. It should give us pleasurable fright. Or it should get us on the edge of our seats. In other words, there should be a suspense in it, and the reader should be able to share hopes and fears of the writer. Okay? So if it is a funny event, the readers should laugh, they should smile, and if it is a tragic event, the readers should feel pity for what happened. Well, although personal narratives capture true events, sometimes writers embellish or use hyperbole to illustrate a point or for dramatic effect. So that means, as I discussed earlier, personal narrative is based on real life events, but in order to create dramatic effect, you need to embellish it. That means you need to decorate it. जैसे उर्दू में किसी ने कहा है ना, बढ़ा भी देते हैं ज़ेब दास्तां के लिए. So in order to create dramatic effect, sometimes you need to embellish it, sometimes you need to develop it or decorate it, and use hyperbole. Hyperbole is a figure of speech, like exaggeration, मुबालगा आराई जिसको आप कहते हैं. So there are various figures of speech that you can use. We won't look at it in detail right now, but some of them are like personification, like metaphor, like a simile, right? We'll talk about it if there is a need. Okay, in short, a personal narrative can say, yes, that captures what living with my mother feels like, or yes, that's what it felt like to lose the championship game. उर्दू में जैसा कि किसी ने कहा, देखना तकरीर की लज्जत के जो उसने कहा, मैंने ये जाना कि गोया ये भी मेरे दिल में है. So you should be able to narrate a story in such a way that the other people should think or feel exactly like it. They might not be able to express it in that way, but they will be able to feel it that way. Okay, so there is a lot of lecturing. Now what we are going to do is we are going to look at some short personal narratives, 2 short personal narratives in fact, and then we are going to analyze it so that later you can write your own personal narrative. Let's look at the first example first. It is titled as My First Talent Show. Okay, so the first thing that you need to note here is that there must be a title. Without a title, your personal narrative won't make sense. And make sure that your title is interesting. Well, my first interesting and relevant, right? My first talent show. What does this title tell you? What could this story be about? Yeah, so someone is going to tell his or her first experience of performing something. Okay, so here is how this narrative starts, personal narrative starts. Standing backstage, I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. So you see, this is a great opening. It is grabbing. It is interesting. It captures the attention of the readers. It doesn't start with once upon a time or any other cliche sentence. Instead, it starts with the description of how you felt it. It actually starts with the setting, standing backstage. Okay, so it gives us the place where the writer is standing, and then it gives us how the writer felt at that particular moment. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. So you see, when you are embarrassed, when you are going to do something for the first time, when you are slightly frightened, you feel that your heart is thumping in your chest. Well, it is beating all the times, but you feel that it is thumping in your chest when you feel frightened. So this is a description of fear. Instead of saying, I was afraid, the writer here has used a figure of speech, and she said, I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. Right? So this is a graphic description, and instead of narrating or directly telling you that I was afraid, she said, I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. Just relax, my friend, Jenny whispered. Okay, now here we have been introduced to another character. Her name is Jenny, and a dialogue has been introduced here. Very often, a dialogue makes the story or personal narrative more lively. You are ready for this. So this Jenny, she tried to console the writer, and she said, just relax, you are ready for this. I nodded. And what does the word nod mean? That means moving your head from up and down like this. And that means when you agree to someone, you move your head in this way. So this is called nodding. Jenny was right. I had been practicing my song for the school talent show for 6 weeks. Now this is the background detail that we have been given. So rather than starting it in the way these events occurred, in fact, it starts with a dramatic effect. The story starts with the feeling of fright by the writer. And then we learn that there is a dialogue between the two characters. and then we are given the background details. So we can understand what they are talking about. So she says, I'd been practicing my song for the school talent show for 6 weeks. So we learned that she's going to perform something, but for this performance, she has already spent 6 weeks, which is a long time. Still picturing an audience packed with kids, parents, and teachers made me want to run out the door. Again, you see, she has described how she felt. It made her run out the door, want to run out the door. So you can, probably when you are frightened, sometimes you also feel that you want to run out of the door. Because she is frightened, among the audience there would be kids, there would be parents, there would be teachers, and she is going to perform for the first time, so she doesn't feel relaxed, she doesn't feel comfortable. Too late for that, I thought, as Mr. Peterson announced my song. So we know that Mr. Peterson is probably the stage secretary, and the writer is waiting for her turn backstage. So when her name was announced, she said that it is too late now. She can't withdraw from this performance now. It is too late because her name has already been announced, so she must go. Jenny gave me a nudge, and suddenly I was on the stage. Nudge is like a push. Jenny is her friend, so she pushed her onto the stage. Standing in the spotlight, you know, in the theater, you have a light that focuses on you, and everyone's eyes are looking at you. So the writer here felt that she was standing in the spotlight. I grasped the microphone and belted out the lyrics. Belted out the lyrics means let the lyrics come out of my mouth. And then I heard my voice pour through the speakers and fill the room. Right? Again, she uses a metaphor here. Instead of saying that I could hear my own voice through the speakers, she says I heard my voice pour through the speakers. Pour का मतलब उर्दू में होता है उंडेलना. So it's like her sound is pouring through the speakers, and this is a metaphor जिसको उर्दू में हम इस्तारा कहते हैं. And fill the room. So the room is like a cup or like a container, and her voice is pouring through speakers into it and filling it. So it is important, rather than just saying I heard my own voice, she used a metaphor and she said I heard my voice pour through the speakers and fill the room. It's going well, I thought to myself. Right. So at the back of her mind, while she is performing, a thought occurs to her that it's going well, so she feels relieved. Don't mess up. Don't mess up means don't panic. I looked out at the sea of faces. Right. Again, you see, she uses a metaphor. The faces of so many people sitting in front of her. They appeared to her like the sea. The sea. The auditorium was dark, but I could see hundreds of eyes staring back at me. If you have ever performed in front of a large audience, you know what she means here, because this is called stage fright. But instead of giving the news, or instead of just telling that I was feeling afraid in one sentence, she tries to describe and create the feeling of fear even among the readers. So she felt that the audience were staring back at her. The smell of candy bars and popcorn filled the room. Okay, so this means that she was really very observant, and she could even smell candy bars and popcorn. I hope Jenny is saving some for me, I thought, as I started the chorus one last time. So while she was performing, she just she gives away her thoughts, what was going inside her head, by telling, I hope Jenny is saving some for me. Saving what? Saving some candy bars and popcorns. And then we have the last paragraph in which she says, as I finished the song, the audience began to clap. Yeah, Katie, one kid yelled, you rock. So this is the first appreciation that she received. Screeched another, you rock, screeched another. Screeched another means cried another. So she started receiving appreciatory remarks from different participants, from different audience. I took a bow and walked off stage. So this is what she did. Took a bow means bent her head like this. It's a convention that after performing on the stage, one bows. With a smile plastered across my face. And then instead of saying that I smiled, she said, with a smile plastered across my face, as if something has been plastered. You know plaster of Paris? So what does this mean? That she walked off stage with a smile plastered across her face. It shows a kind of artificial smile which is painted on her face. How many days until next year's talent show? I asked Jenny. So this last question actually tells that she really felt excited, and now she is anxiously waiting for the next time she can perform. So you see, I go back and you see there are actually 4 paragraphs in this short personal narrative. The first thing that you need to notice is that there is a title, and then she starts with a dramatic effect, and she starts with her feeling, how she felt. Then she gives us the background, why she felt it this way. We learn that she has been practicing for this performance for 6 weeks. And then she tells, narrates the event, when the actual event started, when she actually had to get onto the stage. There is no going back. She felt that she wanted to run away, but there was no going back. Okay, and in the third paragraph, she still felt frightened, but in the last paragraph, she started receiving some positive remarks, appreciation from the audience, and then she tells how excited she is and how impatiently she is waiting for the next talent show. So this example, this sample should give you an idea on how to write your own personal narrative. It could be as short as simple 4 paragraphs, or it could be a bit longer, as we will look at the next one. But the things that you must note here is that you shouldn't simply report an event. It shouldn't sound like a news. In fact, you should give your feelings, your thoughts, and you should use figures of speech like a metaphor and a simile in order to make it alive. Okay, now we move on to the next slide. All right, are you ready for the next personal narrative? Okay, let's move ahead then. Writing a personal narrative. This one I have downloaded from Lindy M. of Jenks East Middle School in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I hope I have pronounced these words, proper nouns appropriately. Okay, the title of the story this time, the title of the personal narrative is Conquering Your Fears. And this is something related to the story that we studied earlier, because that was also Conquering Your Fears, but the title was different. This title is in fact more suitable than the previous title. My first talent show is not as interesting as Conquering Your Fears, because it doesn't simply relate an event. It talks about how you felt on that occasion. Everyone, well, almost everyone, I've ever known has thought of their years in elementary school as their favorites. So this personal narrative starts with a journal statement, and of course it creates suspense, and it also gives us a background information that probably the story is about the elementary school. So the writer is going to narrate something to us that happened to him or her during her elementary school. And okay, I on the other hand do not feel so fondly about elementary school, especially third grade. That was a year I will never forget. So the writer here actually grabs our interest, attracts our attention by making a journal statement. And the journal statement is that almost everybody remembers the good time that we had during our elementary school. But the writer has a different experience. She has an unforgettable event that she is going to narrate to us. So by doing this, what actually she did is that she created suspense. And we know that we are going to listen to something or read something that is different from our own experience. Normally we feel good about our elementary school life, but here the writer is going to narrate something that is not so pleasant, or maybe not so easy to forget. So it is an unforgettable moment from her life. But rather than writing it in a simple way like an unforgettable event from my life, she says that that was a year I will never forget. And remember, during this first paragraph, she has also given us some background. It was not merely elementary school. She was studying in third grade in class 3 when this event happened to her. Let's move on to I was only 8. But I remember it like yesterday. So she keeps this suspense, and once again, rather than telling us directly what happened to her, she is adding pieces of information. Now she tells that she was 8 years old, and she remembers it as it happened just yesterday. So she can recall it vividly. Now what is the actual event? I was sitting in the doctor's office when they gave my parents and me the shocking news. So instead of telling her directly what happened to her, she is going to reveal the event through the others. So other characters are going to narrate it to her, because this was a shocking news. So instead of she breaking it herself, she says, she narrates it through other characters like the doctor. And why is it so? Because it was shocking, and when we will listen it through the others, it will be as shocking to us. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your daughter's condition is getting worse. The only way to fix it is by surgery. And you know, again, this is a dialogue, and that makes the story lively, and it also gives us a shock the way it has been put into words here. Okay, the story continues. Those words ripped into me like a serrated knife into a crisp, cold apple. Okay, now of course we expect shock, we expect fright after hearing this, and instead of simply saying that I felt shocked, I felt afraid, the writer uses this sentence, those words ripped into me like a serrated knife into a crisp, cold apple. Ripped into me is something like entered into my body, forcefully entered into my body, like a serrated knife. Serrated is like a sharp-edged knife into a crisp, cold apple. So as a knife pierces through an apple, similarly those words entered into my ears with the similar sensations, right? As an apple enters in, as a sharp-edged knife enters into an apple, similarly these words entered into my ears with the similar effect. So you can see that this is a simile. Simile जिसको उर्दू में आप तशबीह कहते हैं, राइट? मैंने इससे पहले आपको बताया था मेटाफर, मेटाफर जिसको उर्दू में आप इस्तारा कहते हैं. तो मेटाफर एंड सिमिली are probably two most frequently used figures of speech while giving a personal narrative. It was a horrible sinking feeling that seemed to possess my whole body. Now she uses another image in order to make us feel the way she felt it. A horrible sinking feeling. When you are drowning in water or when you are sinking deep into some void, how do you feel? You feel terribly frightened. And this frightening sensation is not limited to one limb or one part of her body. She says, it seemed to possess my whole body. So her whole body felt a horrible sinking sensation, sinking feeling. A feeling so terrifying that even the bravest person alive could not possibly endure it. So in order to intensify this feeling, she actually used various ways. First, she used a simile, that this feeling is just like a knife entering into an apple. Then she said, in order to intensify, she used another image, and she said that she felt like sinking or drowning. And then she compared that this fright, this was more terrifying than any bravest person could possibly endure. So this is like an exaggeration, the last one. So she used a simile, she used an image, and she used an exaggeration. So these are three figures of speech. Exaggeration को, by the way, उर्दू में आप मुबालगा आराई कहते हैं, right? So in order to convey her feelings, she used three different figures of speech: a simile, an image, and an exaggeration. Okay, remember that for vivid description, we can appeal to various sensations. We can appeal to sense of sight, we can appeal to sense of hearing, we can appeal to sense of touch, sense of smell, or what five senses do we have? Seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, yeah, sense of taste. So here you would see that the writer actually tried to address various senses. Okay, we move on to the next paragraph. I'm sorry, you probably like to read the story, the narrative itself, but here the purpose is not just to read out a narrative, the purpose is to analyze it. So I want you to pay attention to each sentence, to learn the art of writing such a narrative yourself. And how would you make such a narrative yourself? By analyzing it and by learning the tools that the writers use in order to create such effective narratives. I knew I had been sick. So this was not a news for her. She knew that she was sick, and I knew it had been serious, but never even in my nightmares did I think of surgery. So this grammatical structure, but never in my nightmares did I think of surgery, also creates dramatic effect. this inverted sentence actually creates a dramatic effect. You see, I was born with a condition that affects your kidneys. It is called bilateral reflux. It is called bilateral reflux. Okay, so now she gives more background to her problem. The only way I would live was to have reconstructive surgery. So this was the only solution, and she was frightened, terribly frightened about it. Okay, we continue. The next thing I remember, it was 7 o'clock in the morning and I was at the hospital. Okay, we continue. The next thing I remember, it was 7 o'clock in the morning and I was at the hospital. I met with the doctors. Rather, the doctors met with me. Everyone tried to comfort me, but nothing helped. As far as I was concerned, I would be a nervous wreck for the rest of my life. That was if I had a rest of my life. So you see, she has repeated, and I was concerned. This means it was really worrying her. The repetition of the phrase also creates a dramatic effect. I would be a nervous wreck for the rest of my life. This again gives us an image that this is how she felt. And she repeated again, if I had a rest of my life. That means she was feeling that probably she would die. Probably she would not be able to survive this operation, this surgery. Okay, then we continue. It was now time for surgery. They sent a surgical nurse down to my room with a gurney. Being the scared little girl that I was, I thought the moment I got up on it, they would hurt me. So I decided that my teddy bear Rainbow and I would follow along behind it very defiantly with my parents. So the first feeling of fear that she had was to run away from the room along with her parents and her teddy bear, because she was a scared girl, and when she looked at the surgical nurse, she was frightened and she thought that she should run away from there. Along with her parents, she would go out the room. When the doctors saw me walk in, they started to laugh. Well, there were doctors in the other room, so when she walked in, they started to laugh, and I realized that everyone else who had seen me probably had laughed too. So not just the doctors, everyone laughed at her. What was comic relief to them was no comedy at all to me. So I simply put my nose into the air and kept walking. It was amusing to the doctors, because for the doctors and the people in the hospital, it was a pretty casual, common thing. It was a routine. But for a girl of only 8 years old, it was not easy to handle surgery for the first time. Okay, we continue. Let's not waste time. The nurse prepped me and had me lie down on the operating table. Prepped me means prepared me. The doctor asked me what flavor of anesthesia I wanted. Anesthesia, you know, is given in order to make the patient go unconscious so that he or she doesn't feel pain while undergoing surgery. Luckily in their country, probably they have various flavors of anesthesia. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we just have anesthesia. I don't remember that if any of the hospitals have flavors of anesthesia. Maybe they do for children, some big hospitals, I'm not sure really. I thought for a while and answered strawberry. He then asked me to count backward from 100 as he lifted the mask over my face. You can see the graphic details that she is giving here is important. If she had given this event in one sentence, it wouldn't have created the impact on the readers, on the audience. So what she is doing is that she is giving the complete details. What the doctors or what the anesthesiasts asked her, what she replied. So she is giving the complete details here. What the doctors or anesthesiasts asked her, what she replied, and what else happened there. She was asked to count backward from 100, and the doctor lifted the mask over her face. So these details actually make us feel or experience it ourselves. If she had given just it in just one sentence, it would have passed unnoticed. I saw my parents and drifted back to sleep. So this was the last thing that she saw. I remained at the hospital for 1 more week. It was not the best time I ever had, but it wasn't the worst either. So this is how she felt about it afterwards. After that, when she went unconscious, she doesn't remember anything, so she doesn't tell any of those details. Instead, she gives us more background information, and she says that she stayed in the hospital for 1 week, and she says that she didn't like it. It was not the best time, but it was not the worst either. It was not as bad as she had expected. The highlight of my recovery was a special visit from 2 of my favorite cartoon characters. So one thing that she still remembers, the highlights are that while she was in the hospital, she was undergoing post-operative stage, 2 cartoon characters visited her, and she was delighted because these were her favorite cartoon characters. And once again, she is explaining the way 8-year child would feel. Probably now she is a grown-up person, and maybe she doesn't have as much interest in cartoon characters as she did when she was young. But since she is trying to recreate the situation, to relive the experience, she is thinking like an 8-year-old child, and she is narrating the details that concern, that are a matter of concern to an 8-year-old child. So in order to make it realistic, it is important that we step into the boots of the character, or I should say, that we should go back to the time when it really happened and give the details that are relevant. So, and she didn't merely narrate this news, she also narrates her response to it, how she reacted to it. So she says that was wonderful. So her feeling of meeting those 2 favorite cartoon characters was wonderful. Okay, let's look at the last 2 paragraphs of this story. My experience has taught me a lot. Now she is driving us to the central point of her personal narrative. Personal narrative doesn't only have to be a recollection of an event. It should actually have some point for the audience, some message for the audience. So she says that she has learned a lesson from it. I discovered that in order to reach the top, you must learn to climb the mountain, and in order to conquer your fears, you must face them first. So this is the lesson that she learned, that in order to reach to the top of the mountain, you have to climb the mountain. And I think this lesson is great for you as well. What I often keep on repeating during my lectures is that don't be afraid of learning English. Overcome your fear of learning English. Conquer your fear of learning English. And how can you conquer it? By participating in it, by speaking, by listening to English. So you must face it first before you can overcome your fear. If you keep on avoiding it, if you keep on postponing it, if you keep on evading it, you are never going to be able to overcome it. So the lesson that we learn from this personal narrative is that we should face our fears in order to achieve our target. In a way, I am thankful for my surgery because I conquered a lot of my fears. So she is thankful because her surgery was required from a medical point of view, but she also liked it because she learned a lesson. She learned how to overcome her fears, and that's the reason why she is sharing her personal narrative with us. Okay, let's look at the last paragraph now. I'm not telling you to go out and have surgery, but if you do, it's probably not going to be as bad as you expect it to be. So here is another moral for us. Here is another point for us. So the writer very amusingly says that she is not telling us to undergo a surgery, but if we sometimes have to undergo surgery, we should know that it is not as bad as we expect it. And I think, as I said earlier, that this is the feeling that we often have. Most of the times when we are frightened of doing something for the first time, like if you can recall, when did you learn how to ride a bicycle for the first time? When did you ride a camel for the first time? Or when did you jump into the swimming pool for the first time, etc., etc. There are lots of times when you feel embarrassed, when you feel frightened because you are doing something for the first time. And how do you feel under such circumstances? You actually expect the worst. So you know that once you are over with it, it was not as bad as you had expected. Probably when you learned how to drive a car, maybe in the beginning you were terribly frightened, but after learning it, it became a routine, and all your fears are gone. Okay, so here we looked at two examples, two samples of personal narratives, and keeping all the points that we have made, I would like you to pay special attention to the techniques and tools that these two writers have used to create a personal narrative, and then create your own personal narrative. And here are the guidelines. Here is a practice situation for you. I want you to write a personal narrative. That is actually going to be an assignment for you. You are going to write a personal narrative that has an introduction that makes the topic clear while engaging the reader with a known strategy. Right? So you can use different strategies. One of the strategies is that your opening statement is a dramatic beginning. You can start with a dialogue. You can start with an unexpected situation. So your introduction should make the topic clear, and it should be engaging. All right, your personal narrative should also have paragraphs that are organized by time, and you should know how to manipulate pacing. Pacing means your speed. The speed at which you are telling your personal narrative is really very important. So you should pay more attention to the details of the event that is the most important, and you should move fast when you think that the events are not really very relevant. For example, here, before the operation, she gave us, the writer gave us detailed description of how she felt, but then she quickly moved to the next scene, which was post-operative phase, because that she was unconscious, and that is not very realistic to talk about it. Okay, then you need to write a personal narrative that uses strong descriptive language and visual images. You need to use vivid verbs like feel, sensation, and etc. etc. Sorry, sensation is not a verb. Sense, feel, imagine. And you need to use strong adjectives and alliteration. Alliteration, well, I didn't talk about alliteration, onomatopoeia and personification. Okay, let me talk a little bit about these figures of speech. Earlier, when we were looking at the two samples, we focused on in fact, we focused on three important, rather four important tools or figures of speech. We talked about using similes, या तशबीहात जिनको कहते हैं. We talked about using metaphors. We talked about using images. And we also talked about using जिसे आप मुबालगा आराई कहते हैं, exaggeration. Now we are going to look at few more devices. You can use vivid verbs that involve all your five senses: sense of touch, sense of hearing, sense of seeing, etc. And you can use strong adjectives like wonderful, exciting, frightening, etc. etc. You can use alliteration. By alliteration, we mean a phrase which repeats the initial sounds, and it creates a particular dramatic effect. For example, greengrocer. Now we have two words here, green and grocer. Both of them start with the same sound, g. Greengrocer. Or you can say frosty, windy waves. Both the words start with w sound. Okay, onomatopoeia. The next word, onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia means a word that whose sound suggests its meaning. I repeat, a word whose sound suggests its meaning. For example, a cock cocks, a crow crows. So instead of writing the crow, you can say caw, 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 or you can say quack, quack, quack. So this word quack, quack, quack actually suggests its meaning because of its sound. So this is called onomatopoeia. Personification को उर्दू में तजसीम कहते हैं. So if you take something inanimate and then use it as if it were a person, it is called personification. So in other words, if you associate the characteristics of a living being to a non-living thing, it is called personification. For example, if you say the angry sea. Now we know that being angry is a characteristic of living persons. Sea can't be angry, but if we use the word angry with the sea, it suggests that sea was as angry as a human being. So we would say that the sea has been personified here. The sea has been treated like a person. Okay, and you should also use metaphors and similes to give details. You should also use a strong reflective clause. Reflective means that give your thoughts about the ending of the story. A personal narrative that has all no excuse words and conventions correct. That means while you are writing a personal narrative, you should use all these conventions of a personal narrative, and you shouldn't use excuse words there. And finally, it should have exemplary presentation. That means it should be pleasing to the readers. There are a lot of shoulds, but you don't need to feel intimidated. You need to write a personal narrative, and if you keep all these points in mind, you will be able to write one. The point that I'm making here is that instead of memorizing and copying stuff from somewhere, you should learn the techniques and tools that professional writers use for personal narratives, and using these tools and techniques, you should be able to write your own. I would appreciate if you, rather than copying it from somewhere, you take a real event from your life and using the tools and techniques, write it yourself. So even if there are mistakes in it, you should go ahead with it rather than copying it from somewhere. Okay, with this we come to the end of this lecture. We have a quick look at the summary. In lecture 11, we learned how to demonstrate knowledge of personal narrative genre. That means we learned various elements of personal narrative genre. We learned how to analyze personal narratives. We actually looked at 2 personal narratives. And then I gave you an assignment and I asked you to write your own personal narrative. I hope that this lecture would help you write your own personal narrative really well. And with this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Thank you very much.